Hello again, fellow humans. I'm going to try my hand at another review today. This time, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's The Autumn of the Patriarch. Now, this is the second novel I've read by the Colombian writer, the first one being 100 Years of Solitude, which I adored, by the way, just as I'm sure many of you did, if there are people watching this, which I very much doubt. The book, Autumn of the Patriarch, pretty much lived up to my expectations of the author after his first novel that I've read. It was one hell of a novel, but there are a number of reasons for it wasn't quite the masterpiece that its predecessor was. Now, The Autumn of the Patriarch is about an unnamed dictator, mostly unnamed. His name is mentioned once, but I can't remember what it is. He's styled as General of the Universe by his adulators, which obviously has a lot of ego attached to it, and he's the combined essence of many other dictators and absolutist leaders throughout history, like Franco and Stalin, maybe even Marquez's good friend Fidel Castro, as they were friends but before they both died. The interesting thing about this dictator as opposed to his historical counterparts is that a lot of these dictators, the real ones, were praised for being political geniuses despite the horrible mass murders. Even Stalin, he was one of the worst men in history, but he did win the Second World War, but it was basically him. It wasn't really Winston Churchill. And he also made Russia one of the most powerful nations in the world. I'm not saying he was a good person. He still doesn't excuse all the people he killed, but he was a pretty clever guy. This general is the complete opposite of that. He is the most pathetic human being in fiction, I think. I'd even possibly say he's more pathetic than Humbert Humbert from Lolita or Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. He's the distillation of all the worst attributes of humankind. He's like an oversized toddler. He watches girls through the fence. He gets the plots of soap operas changed just because he doesn't like bad things happening in the world. And he loves his mother more than anyone else. Probably she's the only one he loves. Obviously, I don't really feel any sympathy towards him because he's done some awful things throughout the book. He skins people alive just so they'll say they like him. And he drowns children, which I think it says in the blurbs. That's not really a spoiler. But it's difficult not to feel emotional towards him. It's difficult to not to feel a little bit of pity because he's such a pathetic, lonely man. He's probably the most unhappy person in the entire book, despite the fact that numerous people are tortured throughout the story. So it's quite a strict competition for most unhappy. One of the things I liked most about 100 Years of Solitude was its style. Cutting out all the unnecessary bits. Most fiction you get bits which are kind of not really important or interesting, like people going on walks or getting job interviews. They're important for the story's pacing, but they're not really interesting by themselves. I would rather skip them if I wasn't OCD about reading everything in the book, and it probably wouldn't matter. But Gabriel Garcia Marquez breaks the rules of fiction that he skips these bits completely. 100 Years of Solitude was all interesting bits. Every single chapter, every single page had an event on it. I reckon in a normal writer's novel, pacing-wise, you could probably get at least 300,000 pages. Okay, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but a lot of pages. It could be at least 4 times as long. Probably more than that. Probably a whole series worth. And that's really the strength of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's writing, which he does improve even. In Autumn of the Patriarch, he takes it to the logical conclusion, which is sentences where incidences happen. Sentences go on for pages in this novel. There's a lot of commas and no paragraphs. Basically, it all looks like that. There's a lot of strengths in this technique. Every single time I sat down to read this, there was something that blew me away. It was such an intense reading experience. Garcia Marquez has described it as a poem in the solitude of power, and I'm not entirely sure if that's just a figure of speech. It is sometimes, a lot of the time, even more like a poem than a novel. There is lines of dialogue, but it's kind of not really dialogue. It's mixed in with the prose, so it will suddenly, in mid-sentence, change point of view. I'll try and find a bit to read to you. Yet, the night after the audience, while they were playing dominoes, he commented with a certain bitterness that General Rodrigo de Alaguer, that the Queen wasn't even worth dancing with, that she was as common as so many other slum Manuela Sanchez's, with her nymph's dress of muslin petticoats and the gilt crown of artificial jewels, and a rose in her hand, under the watchful eye of a mother who looked after her as if she were made of gold. So he gave her everything she wanted, which was only electricity and running water for the dogfight district. But he warned her that it was the last time I'll ever receive anybody on a begging mission, God damn it. I'm not going to talk to poor people anymore, he said. Before the game was over, he slammed the door. Left, he heard the metal tolling of 8 o'clock. He gave the cows and their stables their fodder. He had them bring up the cow chips. He inspected the whole building, eating as he walked with his plate in his hand. He was eating stew with beans, white rice, and plantain slices. He counted the sentries from the entranceway to the bedrooms. They were all there and at their posts, 14. He saw them rest of his personal guard playing dominoes at the post, the first courtyard. He saw the lepers lying among the rose bushes, the cripples on the stairs. It was 9 o'clock. He put his unfinished plate down on the windowsill and found himself feeling around in the muddy atmosphere of the sheds among the concubines who were sleeping, as many as 3 to a bed, together, with their 7-month runts. He mounted a lump that smelled of yesterday's stew, and he separated 2 heads here, 6 legs and 3 arms there, without even asking who it was. That wasn't a whole sentence. I kind of just stopped there because I didn't really want to read a whole sentence. I think the style creates the best and worst aspects of this book. Every sentence is overwhelming and it's so poetic and lyrical, it's quite hard to believe actually sometimes. This is a translated fiction. It reads like a Joyce novel in parts. However, I think there's something of a style over substance in it. 100 Years of Solitude was a completely original book. There was so much depth in every single character that I think even though they would have a lot more time in a normal novel to be developed, I don't think they would have been developed nearly as much. Marquez has just got this way of developing a character right to the T in a very short amount of time. I think here, though, the symbolic richness is certainly potent and honest in quite a lot of places in the novel. And I think the General himself is a very well-drawn character, but there isn't really any other well-drawn characters. His mother and his numerous girlfriends are just caricatures. A lot of his generals are. I suppose this is a way of describing the isolation that surrounds him, but the main criticism I have isn't that. It's the fact that a lot of the incidents here, unlike in 100 Years of Solitude, are quite cliche incidences, kind of covered up by all the symbolism and the style, all the modernist sentences going on for ages, changes in point of view. A lot of that style covers up the fact that the stories here are really quite generic stories. The unrequited love, the death of a parent, the conflict of a leader and his incredibly powerful servant. Obviously I won't go into more detail on these, you'll have to read the book for yourself. But even though it's probably more overwhelming and poetic on a page-by-page basis than 100 Years of Solitude, it's a lot weaker as a novel because of its style over substance nature, and it's really less original, less intrinsically Gabriel Garcia Marquez than that book was. Despite my criticisms, though, it's a very good book. It does have a lot of depth in many places throughout the novel. It's only style over substance in some areas. And I think I'll definitely give it a B. If I was American, I'd give it a B+, but I'm just going to stick with a B rather than A for now. It could change in the future, in my mind, not in another video. Thank you for watching. I'll keep you posted if I read any other Gabriel Garcia Marquez novels, or any other interesting novels in general, or really shit ones. I'll probably review those as well, because it would be a nice change from the mostly positive reviews I've done so far. Thank you for existing, my very small audience. Farewell.